Before you listen to this episode of True Crime Conversations, just a note. The following interview contains adult themes, violence, abduction, child sexual assault, and the recounting of traumatic events. Listener discretion is advised. It was October 1997 when Cyrese and Stuart Ross decided to take a family holiday to Rockingham, a beachside city about 13 hours south from where they lived in the Pilbara town of Newman, Western Australia. Stuart worked in the mining industry in the town north of Perth, and Rockingham was a welcome retreat. They were surrounded by beautiful beaches and a house on Kent Street, not far from the main road. It was October 14 when their sons, Gerard, aged 11, and his big brother Malcolm, were seen walking along Kent Street on their way to a comic book shop. Gerard had brown hair parted in the middle, hidden under a blue cap. His blue eyes were complemented by a big, boyish smile, with distinctive dimples on both his cheeks. Wearing a black Adidas t-shirt and navy shorts, Gerard looked like any ordinary boy, hanging out with his brother on a quiet Tuesday morning. Somewhere between leaving his parents and his brother discovering he was no longer dawdling behind him, Gerard disappeared. His family searched the streets of Rockingham all afternoon before calling the police. Their 11-year-old son was gone, and he wasn't the type to just wander off. I'm Jessie Stephens, and this is True Crime Conversations, a Mamma Mia podcast looking into the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. In this episode, I'm speaking with investigative journalist Kristin Shorten. Kristin is an award-winning journalist and the producer of a new 8-part series for The West Australian, looking into the murder of Gerard Ross in 1997, or, as the wider public would come to know him, the boy in the blue cap. It was October 1997 when Gerard Ross, who was 11, went on a family holiday. Can you tell us a little bit about the Ross family and who they were?
Definitely, Jessie. So Gerard was 11. He had 2 siblings, Malcolm and Beth. His family actually had come over from Scotland. So Gerard was born in Burnt Island, Fife in Scotland. And when he was a little bit younger, him and his siblings, his parents decided that they would take the 3 children on an amazing adventure down under and move to Australia. They came over on a working holiday to start with. They were sort of treating it as a working holiday, but then they realised that they really loved it here. And as they were travelling around the country, they arrived in Perth and they settled there for a little while before finally moving up to Newman in the Pilbara in WA. So at the time that Gerard was abducted, his family had driven 12 hours down to Perth from Newman in the Pilbara, where they lived at the time. And they were having a 2-week holiday down in Rockingham, which is about 50 kilometres south of Perth. Gerard's auntie and grandmother were coming over from Scotland, so the family had come down to Perth to enjoy 2 weeks by the beach with their relatives before taking them back up to the Pilbara where they lived.
And so they were in Rockingham on this holiday, as you say, and Gerard decided to go for a walk with his brother one day. Where were they headed?
Yeah, so what happened was they were staying in a nice little holiday unit on Kent Street in Rockingham, which is just one street back from the beach. It's a nice, quiet, leafy street. And they were at home. Now, their mother, Cyrese, she was actually 6 months pregnant at this point with twins. So, look, the boys, they were aged 11. Gerard was almost 12 and Malcolm was 20 months older than him. So Malcolm was 13. They were playing in the unit on this Tuesday morning. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning. It was actually still school term. The kids had just been pulled out of school a bit earlier before the school holidays. So it was a very quiet day and just business as usual. The boys were getting a bit restless at the unit. So their mum, Cyrese, suggested to them, why don't you boys go for a walk down to the arcade, the mall, and go to that comic shop that you saw yesterday. She'd given them some money, and the boys had set off together at about 9:30 that morning. Now, Malcolm had his rollerblades with him, so Malcolm wanted to rollerblade and Gerard was on foot. They both left the holiday unit at about 9:30 a.m. and Gerard had walked out. Malcolm strapped on his rollerblades and then sort of glided past Gerard a couple of doors down. He said to his brother, "I'll see you at the shops." Gerard said, "Yep." And Malcolm continued southwest along Kent Street towards where that comic shop was, about 1 kilometre away. And when he arrived, they actually arranged to meet at a little park near the comic shop where Malcolm was going to take his rollerblades off, swap them for his basketball shoes, and then they would walk into the shop together. Malcolm waited there for about 15 minutes and Gerard didn't arrive. At that point, Malcolm went over into the comic shop. Gerard wasn't there. Malcolm then had a look through the arcade. It was a Woolworths arcade, so there was a Woolworths and some other retailers in there. Malcolm had a look around, and after 45 minutes or so, when he couldn't find Gerard, he returned to the holiday unit and let his parents know that Gerard hadn't turned up.
And so Malcolm hadn't seen anyone, had he? Like anyone suspicious in that area? It was literally like Gerard had just disappeared.
Yeah, Malcolm can't remember seeing anything suspicious. No one actually in the family saw anything out of the blue in the days prior or on that morning. So Malcolm had passed his brother like 2 doors down from where they were staying and then had gone ahead. And when Gerard didn't turn up, Malcolm just sort of thought, he's taking his time or he's taken a different route. But obviously by afternoon, it was apparent that Gerard had disappeared. Yet no one had seen anything strange or noticed anything out of the usual.
And can you describe for us what the following days looked like in Rockingham as sort of the family and also police came to realise that this was pretty serious? This was a case of someone having gone missing?
For sure. So Malcolm had gone back to the unit about an hour later and let his parents know that he couldn't find Gerard. He actually suspected that Gerard might have gone back to the unit. He might have been there when he got back and he wasn't there. So him and his mum and dad, they then jumped in the car and they drove back down to the comic shop and had a look there. And then they started asking around the nearby shops. It was once they got back to the comic shop and Gerard wasn't there that his mum started to panic, started to feel that something wasn't right about this. Malcolm at that point didn't think anything too serious had happened. He actually just thought, Gerard, had taken a different route or, was up to something and was going to be in trouble, basically. And their dad also wasn't too worried. He just thought, maybe Gerard had got the comic book and stopped to read it somewhere on the way back. So they weren't too worried, but their mum was starting to have that, I guess, awful mother's intuition that something was wrong. For the next few hours, they continued looking for Gerard on their own. So Cyrese, their mum, started walking the streets with her sister and her mum and the kids, Beth and Malcolm, so Gerard's little sister as well, who was 8. So they started walking up and down Kent Street, looking in the shops themselves, asking people if they'd seen them. It wasn't until about 1 o'clock that Cyrese went to the Rockingham police station and actually reported Gerard missing. Following that, she said that, perhaps police didn't take it too seriously at first. They thought she might have been overreacting, which I think for those times was quite common. Often, children usually turn up when they go missing. But within a couple of hours, police had commenced a search and a door knock of the surrounding area and put alerts out to, their patrol vehicles and whatnot that there was a little boy missing. So by early afternoon, a full search was underway. By that night, he hadn't turned up and everyone was starting to take it really seriously by that point. In the days that followed, the search commenced the afternoon that he had disappeared, but in the days that followed, the search really was scaled up dramatically. the sex crime squad was called in. The task force investigating the Claremont serial killings was called in. Police were recruited from all different sections of the police to participate in the search, like the air wing, the water police, even new recruits, mounted police, all sorts of different sections of the police were involved, as well as the SES, and a full-scale military operation type search commenced the morning after the abduction. And that actually went on for almost 2 weeks. It went on from the 15th of October through until the 25th.
And are we talking door knocks? Like these are police going door to door, seeing if there's anything suspicious,
Yes.
if he's been abducted?
Yeah, absolutely. Police were going door to door knocking on all of the homes in Kent Street and the surrounding streets, as well as actually searching the houses, the backyards, the garages, vehicles, all of that sort of thing. Police were stopping cars and searching them. They were looking in rubbish bins, even the rubbish tip in the coming days. So the SES was checking, and the police were checking bushland in the area, lakes, parkland, vacant land. The police were checking vacant houses in the area, all of that sort of thing. So everything that you'd hope would be done.
And 2 weeks later, which you alluded to, a man is exercising his horse in a place called Carnap, which is about 20 kilometres from Rockingham, when he notices something unusual. What was it that he'd come across?
That's right. So horse trainer Mick Miller was taking his horses out for their daily run through the pines in this pine plantation at Carnap, and he takes his horses through there every day. But on this particular day, he was up high in the stirrups, and as he was trotting along the limestone track, or cantering, I should say, he noticed out of the corner of his eye something unusual, something that didn't look quite right. He didn't go right over to it, but he soon realised that it was a body. At first, he actually thought it was someone sleeping, and he got a bit closer and realised that whoever it was not sleeping. That did look like they were deceased. So he sprinted back to the property where he lived on the outside of the pine plantation, and he called police. They arrived a short time later. It was actually the head of the investigation, the head of Operation Shoalwater, investigating Gerard's disappearance. That was a detective, Senior Sergeant Mick Miller, another very senior detective, John Adams. They asked Mick Miller, the horse trainer. Now, not to be confused, they both have the same name. The horse trainer and the lead detective are both called Mick Miller. They asked the horse trainer to direct them back to the site where he had seen the body. The horse trainer got in the patrol car with the two police. They drove back out there. The horse trainer showed them where it was. They knew straight away. As soon as they got out of the car and walked over, I believe it was John Adams, the detective, he got out of the car. He'd by this point been working on the case for 2 weeks. So as soon as he saw the shoes and socks, he knew straight away it was Gerard. They dropped the horse trainer back off at the property and obviously then cordoned off the pine forest and set up a crime scene.
And did his body hold any evidence about who might have done this to him?
Yes, it did. So there were a few pieces of evidence which police had hoped would help them catch Gerard's killer. One of them was that Gerard's body or clothing had hair on it, which at the time was analysed and assessed to be dog hair. Now, the current Special Crimes Squad reinvestigating Gerard's murder are having those hairs retested just to be more definitive around what species of animal that hair did come from. But certainly earlier forensic testing indicated that it was dog hair. There was also fibres found on Gerard's body. Police won't publicly confirm what type of fibres they were, but my understanding is they may have been some sort of carpet fibre, which could potentially have been from a vehicle, the upholstery of a vehicle that Gerard was transported in or abducted in, something he was wrapped in. It could be from the carpet in a house where he was taken after his abduction. So there were those fibres found on his body as well. An entomologist, which is an insect expert, a forensic scientist basically, who uses insects to help investigate or analyse a crime scene, was present at the scene, and that entomologist found that from the insect patterns on Gerard's body, it appeared that he had been deceased and placed in that location in the pine forest very soon after his abduction. So it is understood that he would have been placed in the pine forest within a day or two of his abduction and had been there for quite some time before his body was found.
And going back to the dog hair, did Gerard or his family have dogs? Was it possible that had come from the holiday house he'd been in, or was that something that was that sort of detectives thought was suspicious?
That's right, Jessie. It's something that detectives considered significant evidence. Gerard and his family did not have a dog, and there were no dogs at the holiday house where they were staying. I have interviewed in the documentary the owner of the holiday unit to ask him about this as well, and he's told me that his holiday unit, it was a pet-friendly holiday unit, and he actually, when he stayed there in that unit himself, took his dogs there, but that had been some 10 months earlier, and he said even though it was a pet-friendly holiday unit and they did let people stay there with their dogs, it was cleaned very well by his wife, and it would have been clean and that there wouldn't have been any dog hair at the time that Gerard and his family stayed there, and that seems to be the belief of police as well. So it is suspected that whoever abducted Gerard either had a dog or had come into contact with a dog, or perhaps that Gerard had come into contact with a dog after his abduction or been transported in a vehicle with dog hair in it. Some police do believe that may have been how he was lured away, because often pedophiles, I shouldn't say often, I'm not sure what the statistics are, but it is a known method of pedophiles to use a dog as a ruse or a way of luring a child by saying, can you help me take my dog to the vets? Or do you want to come and look at my dog? Or do you want to pat my dog? Or, something along those lines. So that's certainly a scenario that police are aware of and which may have possibly happened.
And did police know by examining his body what his cause of death had been?
Yes, police do know his cause of death, but that is something that they only want them and the killer to know. So it's not a piece of information that's ever been made public, and for good reason. It's really important that Gerard's cause of death remains a secret, so that when police do catch the suspected killer or the alleged offender, that is something that they can use to achieve a conviction.
And can you talk us through, so the police have found, as you say, those pieces of evidence. Where does their search begin? Did they start looking at sort of sex offenders or pedophiles in the area? Were there any obvious suspects to begin with?
Yeah, Jessie, it was quite a lot of suspects. I mean, in the first year of the investigation into Gerard's abduction and murder, police had identified more than 300 persons of interest. There was no sex offender registration back then, so police really had to manually go through all of their files and identify whether any sex offenders had been involved in similar crimes in the past and kind of manually check things that way. But, there was a lot of information coming into the investigation and a lot of people nominated as possibly having a link to Gerard's murder. So, as I said, there were hundreds. And it was a matter for police to try and prioritise those suspects, and allocate resources appropriately into investigating all of them. My understanding is that there certainly were a group of core suspects in the early months and years who police would have focused on more intently. But obviously those people, all for one reason or another, they either were written out of the investigation.
And in April of 1998, there was a woman who came forward and said that she thought she remembered seeing sort of a fight or something on the street, didn't she?
Yeah, this is actually really interesting. And that woman, Rose Durek, we interviewed her in the new documentary. She actually came forward on the day, not 6 months later as originally reported. So Rose is a woman who was living on Kent Street, the same street where Gerard was staying and where he was abducted from. at the time in October 1997. Gerard was staying at 105 Kent Street and Rose lived at 72 Kent Street. Now, at about 9:30 on the morning Gerard disappeared, she was leaving her home at 72, and as she reversed out of her driveway and, got onto the road and started driving, she noticed a scuffle between two men and a small person who she identifies as a boy wearing a hat outside 68 Kent Street, which was two doors down from her. So she saw, as she describes it, she saw an incident, some sort of altercation. It looked like they were fighting. She's described it as pushing and shoving or a scuffle outside 68 Kent Street. There was a car parked on the verge, on the grass on the side of the road, and between the car and the house were two men and a boy, and it looked like they were trying to push the boy into the car. Rose drove past this incident very slowly. From a distance, she assumed it was some sort of family, like the parents were trying to get the boy to hop in the car because they were leaving or something like that. But something just didn't seem right to her. She drove slowly past. She realised it was two men and a small child. Well, a child, I should say, a smaller person. And she went past very slowly, but as she approached this group, when she got really close to them, they stopped shuffling and stared at her, sort of almost as if to see what she was going to do. Was she going to keep driving or was she going to stop and intervene? She kept driving and she stopped at the intersection, just a little bit further down. She stopped at the intersection where she had to give way. She looked in her rearview mirror and the scuffle had started again. She was quite concerned, so she actually reversed her car a little bit and they looked at her. She was looking at them in the rearview mirror and then they stopped. At this point, I think, which is quite natural for most people not wanting to get involved, she thought, look, perhaps it's nothing. I'll just leave it. Maybe it's not as bad as I first thought. And she drove away, which she says to this day still haunts her, that decision to drive away. But what actually happened was when she got to her daughter's house half an hour or so later, she actually called the police straight away and reported that incident. The time that she called the police and reported it was hours before Gerard's parents had even reported him missing to the police. So she has become a very credible witness and emerged as possibly the only eyewitness to Gerard's actual abduction.
So it almost sounds like she had a gut instinct that it wasn't right, but you can understand how being on a street and seeing that sort of incident, you might dismiss it as brothers playing or friends playing or something. That wouldn't be your first thought that something sinister is going to occur.
That's right. She said that she thought they were telling the boy off, and it made her think it was sort of a family dispute. Like, sometimes kids can be resistant to getting in the car or, doing what they're told. So she sort of thought it was something like that. Then she realised it was two men and, her suspicion was raised a little bit more. But I think just as a woman, a couple of decades ago, there was that sense of sort of feeling like you don't want to get involved and not wanting to get into that sort of confrontation with two men. So she drove off, but she said it really worried her, the half an hour drive all the way to her daughter's house. She was really concerned. She couldn't sort of put it out of her mind. As soon as she got to her daughter's house at Mandurah, about half an hour away, she told her daughter, and her daughter said, I think you should call the police. That sounds really suspicious and strange. So Rose did that. And after that, the next week, she actually spent at least a good few days going out with the detectives, trying to identify the type of vehicle she'd seen, describing the men that she saw and the boy, and also, they even did a mild hypnotherapy with her to try and help her remember details of what she had seen. So she went around to the car yards with police, did photo boards, all that sort of thing, and they even took her to a hypnotherapist, which was sort of common back then, a common police technique that sort of to help people remember memories, details of events that they'd seen. So she did certainly give police a lot of assistance, and they took her information very seriously. But unfortunately, to this day, they are still unable to confirm whether what she saw did involve Gerard or was in fact something completely unrelated.
And what was her description of those two men? Did she have a sort of ballpark age or the colouring or anything like that?
She did. She described them as being both in their 30s or perhaps one of them in their 40s. One had dark hair, one had light hair. By light hair, she said it could have been blonde or grey. She's not quite sure. And she said the little person in the middle had black hair and had a cap on. Now, she didn't really catch their facial features. And then when it comes to the vehicle that she saw, she said that, look, she didn't know a lot about cars at the time, like what the names of models were. And she was sort of more interested in the scuffle that was happening next to the car. But she described the vehicle to police as well as she could and, pointed it out when they took her around to some car yards the following week and described that vehicle as being a burgundy or dark red or maroon, possibly a station wagon. And that's about as much description as she was able to provide.
And there was talk, wasn't there, either, the day of, I believe it was, of someone who had perhaps been stopping children and trying to get them into their cars. Was that something that was explored by the police?
Yeah, absolutely. So there had been a number of incidents around that time where people had stopped children on the street and tried to get them into their vehicles. So the sort of most significant one that police have appealed to the public about was an incident approximately 6 weeks before Gerard disappeared. A man driving a beige station wagon, I believe was the model, had stopped and tried to get another little boy of Gerard's age into his vehicle, and the boy had said no. And the boy's family sort of didn't think too much of it at the time, but after Gerard's disappearance, they had reported that to police. So there were a number of incidents like that, but police were never able to determine whether there was any link or identify the people involved in those earlier incidents. And you also have to keep in mind that in 1997, CCTV wasn't as prevalent or as advanced as it was today. So sort of identifying the people in those vehicles was really impossible without having recorded their rego number.
And this was 22 years ago now, and there's just a fresh appeal at the moment. There's been reward money for anyone who can lead to an arrest. There's been, police have been very public about this case for a really long time. Are there any new leads at the moment that make police sort of, I guess, is there more momentum that they could potentially solve this crime now? Why has this new appeal happened in 2019?
Yeah, so police held a press conference on Saturday following the launch of the documentary to confirm that they were in fact conducting a cold case review into Gerard's case. Now, that's not something that they would normally share with the public, but it had been something that they had revealed in the documentary, so they did come out and confirm that publicly. Basically, since that first year following Gerard's abduction and murder, the leads really did dry up, and there have been other cold case reviews over the last 2 decades into this investigation, but obviously not a lot has come from those. So with this current cold case review, which the Special Crime Division and the Cold Case Homicide Squad within the Special Crime Division commenced last year, they've been given the resources that they need to really throw everything at this investigation now. So this is actually a full reinvestigation of Gerard's abduction and murder, whereas in the past, some of the reviews have focused only on particular parts of the investigation or particular suspects. Now, what they're saying now is that they've got more resources. They've got about 24 detectives working on this in a full-time capacity, and they are reviewing, re-examining and reinvestigating every single aspect. So that means every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every suspect. And they are really optimistic and hopeful that by working through that process, and with the advancements in DNA technology now, that they may be able to have a breakthrough. And as they're very conscious of, and the family is, and I am, that time really is running out for this investigation because it's been 22 years, and not only because people are getting older and some are passing away. We've seen some suspects have died. Even police investigators who worked on the original task force have sadly died. witnesses are really getting on and memories are fading. So that's a particular challenge for the Cold Case Homicide Squad now in trying to piece this together. You know, even those most closest to the story, like Gerard's family, there's discrepancies in what they remember because it is so long, and that's just human.
Do you think that police might have more of a sense of who they're after than the public might know? Because reading up on this case and sort of having followed it, there appears to be suspects who have alibis that didn't quite check out. And, you know, often what the police do share is very selective. The public don't know everything. Do you think that they might be onto something we don't know about?
Absolutely, in terms of the fact that there would be higher priority suspects than what the public knows about. You know, I know even in some of my own reporting, I have revealed information about particular suspects over the years who, you know, I've become aware of without identifying them, but in more general terms. But, you know, over the last 22 years, more than 1,300 people have been linked to Gerard's abduction and murder. So that's 1,300 persons of interest who police have to now reinvestigate and work through. So, of course, of those 1,300, you would expect that there would be a core group of suspects or a group of hot suspects that the public wouldn't know about. Now, how many of those there are or how hot they are, what evidence police have on them, I'm not sure. Obviously, it's a very complex matter trying to have enough evidence to be able to actually charge someone. So whether police have some suspects in mind who they think are prime suspects for this abduction and murder, I'm not sure. But what I can say is that detectives from the Cold Case Homicide Squad have just last month gone over to the UK to seek expert advice from experts at the National Crime Agency in London, forensic experts, special crime experts, homicide experts, and in particular child homicide experts, to help assist them in prioritising suspects and coming up with the likely profile of Gerard's offender. And when they got back from that trip, what they've said is that the person who committed Gerard's abduction and murder is a very special type of offender in that they're not your average pedophile or your common pedophile, and that's not to downplay the impact of sexual assaulting or sexual offending against children. But what they're trying to say is that for someone to offend at this high level, in that not only, you know, offend against a child in a sexual way, but to actually abduct a child and murder them, that takes a very special person. It actually would take someone who is a psychopath. So someone of a psychopathic nature to be able to offend in this way, and also someone able to commit a very bold and brazen daylight abduction like that. So what police will say about the offender is that most pedophiles are not capable of this type of killing. And also there are other things that research tells them, like the offender is most likely probably a lone male. They would have had to have obviously had a driver's license and access to a vehicle if indeed they've been abducted Gerard in a vehicle. They also believe that the pine forest where Gerard found is not the primary crime scene. That's where Gerard's body was left, but they don't believe that that is where he was murdered. So the offender likely had access to somewhere private, a property, their home, somewhere where no one else would be, where they could actually commit this killing. And they believe that whoever the offender was also would have been very familiar with that pine forest where they left Gerard and very comfortable with where they went, how they got there, and that they wouldn't be disturbed while placing Gerard's body there. So there's, I guess, some of the parameters that they're working within. But from the advice in the UK, they're really looking to use that to try and narrow their focus from those 1,300 people of interest and work out who to prioritise in that reinvestigation of suspects.
How confident are you as someone who's worked so closely on the case that we'll ever have an answer?
I'm very optimistic. So I'm certainly very hopeful. It would mean a lot to me. I've covered this story for a long time and feel quite personally invested in it. It's really hard for me to say I guess, to sort of stipulate a level of confidence, because I'm not privy to the police investigation and all of their information. Obviously, I have sources and find out little bits here and there, but I'm not privy to all of the information that they have. I don't know how close they are to a breakthrough, but I know that they're definitely dedicated and committed to solving this case. It's the Cold Case Homicide Squad's highest priority at the moment. It's the second largest investigation in WA police history, only to the Claremont serial killings investigation, which is why Claremont's now before the courts. That's why there are now more resources available for this case. And I know that the team that they have at the Special Crime Division working on this case, they're really dedicated. They're very committed. There's also a sort of fresh mix of detectives, so they bring fresh eyes and can hopefully identify new leads, just look at things in a different way than perhaps investigators have in the past. So, look, I'm very confident that their investigation is following, world's best practice in terms of their methodologies, and that they're working through it in a very methodical and thorough way. But, yeah, I just don't know. I don't know how close they are to a breakthrough, because I'm not privy to all of the evidence that they have.
And the last thing I just wanted to ask you is if you've got any sense of how the Ross family are today and how they've coped in the 22 years since.
Absolutely. So I was fortunate enough to spend some time with the Ross family during filming of our documentary. I went and visited them in Scotland and also Qatar, where Gerard's brother Malcolm lives now. And they are still very much grieving and traumatised by Gerard's abduction and murder. They're very private people, and this isn't something that they talk about really at all. They very much keep Gerard's memory alive within their family, but what happened in 1997 isn't something that they would even talk about very much within their family, let alone publicly like this. This was the first time they'd spoken publicly and shared their story in 22 years. So I'm sure that participating in the documentary and doing the interview was somewhat confronting for them. I had actually been asking them for an interview for 6 years. So it was a long road to get to that point. And they approached it probably very reluctantly and anxiously at first, but they did ultimately agree to participate because they knew that the publicity would hopefully benefit the case and generate new leads for the police. And I explained to them that I believed it was really important for the Australian public to hear their story and get to know them and humanise Gerard's story and Gerard's case, because so that it would resonate more deeply or more widely. So, look, I think, this is a very probably traumatic and emotional time for them. 22 years after their son was abducted, and Gerard's parents told me that while they were happy to participate in the documentary, they wouldn't actually watch it. So still reliving those events for them is still so painful, and it's still, those memories are still so raw for them. So I think, they really want to see justice for Gerard, and they really want his killer charged and punished and put away and off the streets. But at the same time, that will be really confronting and difficult for them. It'll make the situation really real. And Gerard's killer, who doesn't currently have a presence in their life at all, will suddenly have a face and a name, and that's something that they'll have to confront. So, I think this is a really tough time for them.
I can't imagine that kind of grief of not knowing what happened to a child and living with that for 22 years. And it's so important that the family knows, and that all the detectives, all the people who have done so much work have some sort of answer, because there could be someone out there still who is capable of this kind of crime, which is not something that anyone wants ever repeated again. So it's clearly such an important case. And thank you so much for all the work you've done on it. The documentary itself is so insightful, and it really humanises, as you say, the little boy at the centre of it and a grieving family.
Thanks so much, Jessie. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on and your support.
To find out more about Kristin's reporting and to watch the full series from The West Australian titled The Boy in the Blue Cap, just head to www.thewest.com.au or follow the link in the description of this episode. For further reading on the case, just head to our website. We'll include a link to articles and images relating to this episode in the description. True Crime Conversations is a Mamma Mia podcast, hosted by me, Jessie Stephens, and produced by Elise Cooper.